All guests on ZASLOW Show 2.0 brought to us by the official beer of the program, Johnny Cuba. European roots with that Caribbean soul. A refreshing German lager in a can. Go to johnnycuba.us. Use the Johnny Locator. Find the nearest location to you. Make sure you always drink responsibly. And, of course, don't forget Johnny Cuba's mantra, stay tranquilo. And, of course, our pal joins us every Thursday. Week 15 of the NFL getting started tonight. Thursday Night Football. Rams, 49ers, CBS Sports Fantasy Football expert Jamey Eisenberg here with us. Hello, Jamey. How are you today?
I'm doing great, man. How are you?
I'm good. So, really weird that I feel like, is this the first season, so in an 18-week season, everyone wants to have their fantasy football playoffs done, presumably by week 17. So, usually, your playoffs are beginning week 15, maybe some week 14. But the buys are so late this year in the season. For instance, in the big league that I do, our first round is this weekend, but like our last week was this past weekend, and we still had buys going on. I don't remember another year where that's been the case. Am I misremembering?
If anything, it was last season that they had a bye like this. This feels like one of the rare instances where it went this late. And, we had one question on our podcast. We do this segment called Fantasy Cops where we try to, address some commissioner scenarios. And some league had originally either not set their playoffs start week 15 because that was they intended to do, or they just used the default setting of previous years because before there was week 18, everybody was doing their playoffs 14, 15, 16. And there was a manager who had planned for the playoffs to start in week 14 with a bye, and then all of a sudden had to play in week 14, but didn't pick up quarterback, tight end or something. And so they had a big disagreement, so
Wow.
there have been some concerns about it. Some of the big tournaments, the Scott Fish Bowl, for example, which is a very popular fantasy league, they start their playoffs in week 14 because they have to do that to get it done because it's one league then plays multiple leagues. So there are some scenarios where week 14 really crushed a lot of people. But yeah, if you are surviving and advancing, you get all your players back. The nice thing is hopefully those 6 teams that are on a bye, you get fresh legs from those guys and some injuries that were bothering them.
So how does that league work that you were just saying? It sounds like it's like a Champions League where you win one league and you play the winner of another league?
Yeah, so you have to I think it's one matchup to the first 2 seeds or top seed and top point scorer of your league play each other, then you move on to play other leagues. There's like 3,000 people in this league. It's pretty impressive. Scott Fish is probably one of the more generous people in our fantasy community. He does a lot for this charity Toys for Tots and runs an organization called Fantasy Cares, and he has this giant tournament where some celebrities play in it. A lot of the all the big fantasy analysts play in it. And if anybody wants to try and get into it, you can go to scottfishbowl.com, and he lets a lot of people in. So it's great fantasy league.
What happens if you have the same player as another guy you're facing from a different league?
It's going to happen.
Yeah. That's interesting. I've never heard of that before.
We do something similar also for St. Jude. We call it our Fantasy Football Today Open. We basically just ripped off Scott Fish, and he knows it. he's just a good guy about it because it's
look, it's for St. Jude. I dare you to get upset and make us stop doing the league. What's the matter with you? Come on, St. Jude, one of the greatest causes out there. Before we get to fantasy football, Belichick. Did you believe that the Belichick rumors were real until it was confirmed yesterday?
Not at all, and I thought, okay, he's got some team on the hook that he's trying to drum up the price. He's trying to just make NFL teams interested. And maybe that was the case, and they just said, you know what, go ahead, do your thing. We don't want to coach at your age, and some of the headaches that you bring from a front office standpoint as opposed to just what you do on the field. So, look, if this is something that he wants to do, kudos to him. He's setting up his son, I think, to take over the program eventually. I made the joke yesterday on X, Twitter, whatever we call it now, that he's going to have a 5-star recruit and a 1-star recruit. The 5-star recruit will get hurt. The 1-star recruit will take over. It'll be the greatest 4 years in college football history, and he'll have his dynasty set up as the greatest college coach of all time. But look, it's a brand new world. All these college coaches want to get out and get into the NFL. You have, arguably the greatest coach of all time wanting to stay out of the NFL and get into college football. He hired a general manager, to run what has now become a franchise as opposed to just recruiting. So the NIL stuff will be done by Mike Lombardi, and we'll see how this all works. But I think from an X's and O's standpoint, it'll be fine. Will he handle the recruiting and will players just be lining up to say, I want to go play for Bill Belichick? That's going to be the fun thing to see.
We know he wanted an NFL job, and I think Shula's record is really important to him. He's clearly not going to get it. Because at the very least, he'll be at North Carolina for a few years. And at that point, no one's hiring 75-year-old Bill Belichick. So Shula remains the all-time record holder. I guess we'll see what Andy Reid does down the line. But if Belichick wants that record from Shula, and he doesn't even wait for a second coaching cycle, his agent must have put the feelers out there and realized no one's going to hire him again, right?
You would assume, and I think depending on how much he wanted to have control of personnel, that I think was the big story with Atlanta last year. I think he wanted that job and they didn't want to give him control of the front office also. So, I mean, he's earned that right, if to pick the jobs that he wanted, and every NFL team has the right to say no, so if he was going to say, okay, I want to wait out the Dallas situation, maybe that was something he was looking forward to, even to work with Jerry, knowing that could have been maybe a partnership. They seem like they're going to go back to McCarthy. The Giants job was probably something that was alluring to him. And, the Maras came out and said they're going to bring back Joe Shane and Brian Dable. We'll see if that holds true. The Jets are probably a mess that he didn't want to get involved with. The Saints are a mess. There was some thought maybe as a joke that would he work for Tom Brady, now part owner of the Raiders, and, that job may become available. So, yeah, I would imagine his agent did his due diligence and the league said either no or not right now, or let's see what happens. And, you're right. And I will just go back to one thing with the Shula thing. I think for the most part, you're correct. Maybe Andy Reid, but there are so many young coaches now. Would it shock you if Sean McVay says, I'm in this for the long haul and I'm going to coach until I'm 70? He'll break the record. I mean, he's got that ability and he started so young, so someone like that could still challenge it. But yes, it does feel like Shula's record is mostly safe.
All right, let's get to the action tonight as Week 15 gets going this evening. Rams, 49ers. It certainly feels like this is it for the Niners. They cannot lose this game. Who do you like tonight?
I mean, it could be the same for the Rams. They're still chasing the Seahawks at this point. The Cardinals are in the mix. But yes, 49ers basically need to win out. I like a lot of the players here. We got the story. Usually you and I record this a little bit earlier in the day on Thursday. It's a good thing we waited because now we find out that Isaac Arendo may be playing, the next man up for the 49ers that got injured last week. And so that's a much better opportunity, a much better player, I think, just based on Patrick Taylor, who was going to be the next guy, who was their fifth string running back to start the season. Now, Garendo, if he's healthy, you just have the risk of, is he 100% healthy? We haven't seen him in practice. So I'll start Garendo as number 2 running back. I like the setup for Brock Purdy a lot. He lit them up for 31 fantasy points in the first meeting in week 3, and that was without Deebo Samuel, without George Kittle. Now, you can basically say he's been without Deebo Samuel for the last stretch of games, but obviously having Kittle back is huge. So Juwan Jennings is a stud right now. Kittle's a monster. So Purdy's a top 10 quarterback, borderline top 5 guy. And on the other side, Stafford, we had one of our research guys send this out. Stafford, in the last 2 seasons, I don't know the stretch of games, but when he has all 3 of his top weapons, Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, Kyron Williams on the field, in the last 2 seasons, he's 4,700 yards passing, 35 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. He's just a monster when those guys are there. So he's been great since week 8 when Puka and Cooper Kupp came back. He's a borderline must-start quarterback. Kyron's a must-start running back. The 2 receivers are must-start guys. Puka's just playing out of his mind right now. So should be a fun game if everything holds the form.
All right, let's do the Dolphins. Dolphins, they are in Houston. They another one, cannot afford to lose this game. Tua has been as good as it gets since his return. What do we like here?
Like a lot of the Dolphins, the Texans are missing their middle linebacker, after the hit on Trevor Lawrence. They're down a couple members of the secondary. The pass rush has been great, so if they can protect Tua, I think he's going to have a big game. The question is, can they run the ball? Because they haven't been running the ball very well lately. Achane's just been a stud in the passing game. And like you said, Tua's been as good as anybody. I think if he had played and their record is flipped, they're above 500 team, we may be talking about Tua as an MVP candidate. His last 4 games have just been impressive, averaging over 40 pass attempts per game, averaging over 29 fantasy points per game. So as a fantasy quarterback, he's dialed in right now. And you've seen this Texans defense. The last 2 games that they played, they gave up over 20 fantasy points to Will Levis and Mac Jones. So with what Tua's doing right now, the biggest question clearly is, can you trust Jonnu Smith? Can you trust Jalen Waddle? Now, Jonnu was shut out until the overtime period last week when he had all 3 catches, all 44 yards, and a touchdown. I'm not worried about Jonnu Smith. He's just based on the position and what he's done the last month. You're starting him. Waddle's the concern. I do like the fact that he's played Houston twice in his career. He's had 2 solid games against them. He's from Houston. This is his first opportunity to go back home and play in his hometown. And in 2 of the last 3 games, he's gotten 8+ targets. So I'm going to say he's a borderline starter. I just don't want to say go all in on him yet. But there is a chance for him to stay hot and come off what he's been a better stretch of games for him than what we saw earlier this year.
We have an incredible slate of 4:00 games this Sunday. Let's start with the Colts and Broncos. Monster game for the final wildcard spot. What do we like?
I think both quarterbacks are in play. They're not slam dunks, clearly, because Bo Nix, last time we saw him, he was bad against Cleveland, and Anthony Richardson has clearly been all over the map. But the Broncos are down one of their key members of their secondary, Riley Moss. You saw the last time he missed was that Cleveland game. Jameis Winston went for nearly 500 yards. That would be a shock to see Anthony Richardson do that. If his receivers hold on to the ball, they've had a bad case of drops all season long, then we could see a big game for Anthony Richardson because he's been running the ball a lot more lately. He's got 3 rushing touchdowns in his last 2 games. He's been 60 yards or more in 2 of those games. So he's doing a great job with his legs. We like that for fantasy. So I think he's in play as a borderline starter. Bo Nix, prior to last week, had been pretty consistent, 20+ points, borderline starter as well. Really for the Broncos, the only must-start player is Courtland Sutton. He's been an absolute stud. And then for the Colts, you're still starting Jonathan Taylor. He has not had a good season. So hopefully he finds the end zone here, just not involved in the passing game. I do like Josh Downs back for Anthony Richardson and back for the Colts, but he's still just a number 3 receiver, but he has had a good season so far. And Michael Pittman, I think, is going to be the one that gets Patrick Surtain, so probably want to sit him this week.
How about the Bills and Lions also at 425?
Yeah, it's hard not to like almost everything in this game. It's just a matter of which Bills receiver can you trust. And I'm going to go with Khalil Shakir. He's been the most consistent of the group. Keon Coleman is coming back. Dalton Kincaid coming back. So Josh Allen has everybody at his disposal. I mean, Allen's just the best player in fantasy right now. So if you have him, he's going to hopefully.
Is he going to win MVP?
He's the MVP right now. Yeah. So if the Ravens can somehow manage to steal the division from the Steelers, and Lamar has a unreal stretch run like he's had a good portion of the season, he may steal it. If the Bills stumble a little bit down the stretch, and this is a big game, Jared Goff could potentially steal it. I mean, no, he's having a great year, and you have to look at their record. If Mahomes can get hot, from the statistical standpoint, he could obviously steal it, and Barkley's still in the mix just because he has a chance to get to 2,000 yards. So he needs to have a big game against the Steelers. But I think just based on what Josh Allen is doing right now, he's the MVP, but it can flip on a dime as we've seen on a week-to-week basis. For the Lions, look, everybody's at play. They're just so good right now. And I think this game, just based on how these 2 defenses look, last week the Bills couldn't stop the Rams. The Lions have struggled to stop a lot of people lately because of injuries. We're going to get a high-scoring game here.
How about the Steelers and Eagles?
Might not be a high-scoring game just because of the defenses that we have here. But look, even though Jalen Hurts is somewhat struggling a little bit because he's not throwing the ball a lot, you're still starting him. You're starting Saquon. I hope we get a squeaky wheel game from A.J. Brown. Those guys have been chirping at each other a little bit in the media, which is, I'm sure not fun for that locker room and some of the former members of the Eagles commenting on it. But look, you're starting A.J. Brown. Devontae Smith, more of a number 3 receiver. And for Pittsburgh, there's not a lot to like because George Pickens isn't playing. But Najee Harris, Jalen Warren, Harris, a low-end starting running back in most leagues, and Warren a potentially good flex because he has been doing some things in the passing game.
Jamie, who are some of the injury concerns we got to keep an eye on over the next couple of days?
I mean, the biggest one is the Thursday night situation with, Garendo. So keep an eye on that. I'm trying to think. Josh Downs is a big one. If he plays, that's huge. I don't think there's a lot of key. George Pickens, we know, is not going to play. I'm trying to think of what else. It's a pretty clean week for the most. Oh, Breece Hall. I'm sorry. Yeah, there are 2 running backs. Breece Hall and Ken Walker. So Hall, it does not seem like he's going to play this week. Walker, probably the same. Zach Charbonnet was an absolute stud last week. So I think a lot of people who handcuff the 2, you say, okay, let Ken Walker sit. I got the starting running back for the Seahawks. Yeah. He's going to be awesome. If Walker returns, a little bit of a headache. With Breece Hall most likely out, you're looking at Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis. Both guys were basically even in terms of playing time and relatively even in production. I give a slight edge to Braylon Allen over Davis because I think he'll be a little bit more involved in the passing game.
Great job, Jamie. Tell everybody how they can listen to you leading up to tonight's game and then all the action on Sunday.
CBSSports.com. You can read all of our content there. CBS Sports HQ. It's our 24-hour streaming network. And obviously check out our podcast, which is where we give most of our best information. Fantasy Football Today. You can find us on YouTube as well. We'll help you with the next few weeks with the fantasy playoffs. Obviously, it's money time. So check us out. We'll hopefully deliver you to that championship.
Awesome. Thank you, Jamie. Great job as always, man. Enjoy the weekend.
Thank you.